Now, our first speaker will be addressing some of the market trends, the impact of recent disruptions, and how to identify new opportunities and take risks. Ascential Events are the parent company of the Cannes Lion International Festival of Creativity and its 5 associated festivals. They run Money 2020. It's an award-winning event you might have heard of, and a diverse portfolio of award-winning international B2B events and trade exhibitions. Phil Thomas has had an international career and is well-versed in everything events. He's Ascential Events CEO and our first guest, and also I understand fresh from a Christmas party as well. So I'd like to welcome Phil to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you. Start the timer so I don't go overboard. Morning, everybody. Thanks very much for coming out on this cold and miserable December morning. Maybe we could start with a bit of summer sunshine. What do you say? Yeah?
There is no room in the world I would rather be in right now than in this room with you people, because you're the world's thermostat.
This is the epicenter of creativity. The greatest creative minds are here, and we want to be part of that, because what we want to do is we want to come here and be inspired.
I come primarily because I think it is, the Oscars of our industry.
It recognizes what the best work is in a range of categories.
You get exposure to all the most amazing work on the planet. You see where the bar is. And also, there's just this energy of people who are excited to be doing the work that we're doing and raising the game. It's very, very energizing.
I consider myself a marketer. My career has been strictly about being able to sell my products.
But what's so wonderful always about Cannes, you can see things growing and getting momentum. You can see new ideas coming in, and you can explore that with all the brightest and the sharpest people in the industry.
We launched a product that went pretty well. It was 6 years before we came here. So the revenue charts at that time was basically going like this, and when we came here to Cannes, we got a very good exposure to the markets, and after this, our revenue charts went like that. Most of the success we had was because of Cannes.
I always love Cannes because for me, it's a chance to nourish myself with the sort of the vibrant kind of creativity, the fountainhead really of new stuff being created, and I think it's really important that you invigorate yourself.
I like to come to Cannes Lions because I get to see the work of the now and the work of the future. I get to meet clients and colleagues that I don't get to see in the UK, and it's a pretty special place.
For me, it's like having every year a master degree in what I'm doing. It's amazing.
Cannes Lions is a platform we have to come back every year because it provides such a great inspiration and aspiration where we can get a lot of creativity from.
I think one of the reasons I'm here is I've always believed in the power of creativity to completely change the world.
Dare to be different. Aim higher.
Can you hear that?
I have dreamt about this moment for so long, coming to Cannes and talking to the most powerful people in our industry.
I want you to help us to create the biggest campaign ever for humanity.
So, that livened things up a bit. So what does Ascential do? Let's quickly go through. We've got a number of different business models. We run exhibitions. So we're just basically selling space. It's the free delegate model. And the revenue stream is simply selling space, and our big ones there are Spring Fair and Autumn Fair, about 75,000 visitors between them. Then we run festivals like the Cannes Lions that you just saw. 3 revenue streams there. Firstly, we have a lot from our entries into our awards, and I'll come back to awards in a minute. People pay to attend the event, of course, and we have a little bit of sponsorship, but no stands at all. And then the third model is a kind of hybrid model. We've got an event called BET, which is an education technology event in London and in other parts of the world. And that is largely speaking an exhibition event, but it's also driven by content. And Money 2020 is kind of the holy grail of events, really, because it has all 3 revenue streams. So it has sponsorship, it has a very large exhibition, and people also pay $3,500 to attend. It's kind of the perfect business model, I think, for events, and a hard one to get to. And we have around about 500,000 delegates globally at our events across the whole portfolio. So what we look for, we're not the biggest event organizer in the world by any means. We like to think that one day we will be the best. But what we look for in terms of the events that we might launch or acquire are, we're after large scale. I don't know about you guys, but I always find that actually putting on a small event is just as hard, if not fucking harder, than putting on a big event. I find that definitely. Putting on Cannes Lions is actually easier than putting on some of our events that have 700 or 1,000 people. So we're looking for large scale, and that's, in our estimation, 10,000 plus delegates, or a route at least to about £30 million revenue. As I mentioned before, multiple revenue streams really make life very, very much more pleasant. I know there's a session later on about sponsors, but I do think that events that are run, largely speaking, through sponsorship revenue are at great risk in a downturn, and what strong events have in common is as many revenue streams as you can possibly get, which is why we're kind of obsessed with awards. Obviously, weak competition. What I have found about awards is that, about events, is that really quite often in any space, there's only really room for one big one. There might be lots of different kinds of competitors, but in order to dominate, you have to go in with a relatively weak competition, and you have to be the biggest, and you have to be the very clear number one. The other thing we look for is a broad market. So there are events for absolutely everything on God's green earth. But if you take, say, Cannes Lions, the market that we address is effectively all of communications. It's not just advertising, it's all of communications. And that allows us to appeal to people like Facebook and Google, companies like Warner Music and Universal Pictures, TV companies. And the broader you make the proposition, what I find is the easier it is to grow the business. And again, with Money 2020, there are many events about, for instance, about lending. But lending is a very small part of Money 2020. There are events just about payments, but actually payments is a relatively big part, but not the only part of Money 2020. So the broader the market and the less niche it is, the more attractive we find it. So the good news about events, the reason, so I used to be a journalist. I was editor. I was the editor of a film magazine called Empire, which was very good fun. And then I ran a group of lots of different magazines, including FHM, the well-known sexist men's magazine that I ran for a few years. So I used to be a journalist, and I got into events because what I realized was that magazines were going down the dumper. And I only really realized this retrospectively, but I like to tell the story that I could see it coming. I just kind of happened into events, and events are incredibly strong. And the really good news is that when you get them right, of course, they're very high margin. We were just having a conversation about what are the margins of events and what should you be looking for in terms of margin, especially when you're acquiring or when you're launching, what are you trying to get to? I don't think I'm breaking any confidences to say that the margin of our events averages about 45% across Ascential's events. It goes up to 60% if you're really dominant. Some of our events are more like 20%, and that's high margin. So when you get it right, the success, however, are extremely high, and that makes it a very attractive sector to be in, because you will have seen many, many events launch and flame out and fail, or just not get off the ground. Because although you can start an event, it's pretty hard to start a successful event. And of course, as we all know, and I think it was touched on earlier on, is that the great thing about events, and the reason that digital hasn't disrupted them yet, is because they are completely different from every other media on the planet. They fulfill a truly fundamental human need. And this is why I got into events and I moved from magazines, because I realized that magazines could be disrupted, but actually human beings needing to be together can't be disrupted. And I don't care what anybody says, they cannot be disrupted. People want to be together, they're desperate. So this is some geezer from Harvard. You kind of know it already. There's a real negative downside to tribes, as we're finding out from Brexit and Trump. But the good news for us is that people want to be in the tribe. So they want to be in the Cannes Lions tribe. They want to be in the Money 2020 tribe. They are absolutely desperate to be together. Human beings need each other so, so much. And that's what makes it strong. And of course, the other, I'm sure you've thought about this, you know this already, but just try digitizing a handshake and a conversation and a serendipity of a conversation. There was that period a few years ago, you know, when the future was going to be digital conferences and webinars and all that sort of stuff. Doesn't work, because what events do so brilliantly is they help you to bump into people who you never thought you were going to meet and allow you to build relationships. There is, however, bad news about events and the challenges that we deal with every day. The simple fact is that there's a load of legacy players, amongst which I put ourselves, and they are being innovated around. And the best example, I think, is Web Summit. So those guys from Ireland are about 32 years of age. They've gone from 150 delegates in Dublin 5 years ago. This year in Lisbon, they had 53,000. Now, Web Summit is fantastic at PR, and the stuff that they churn out about what they do, most of it, let's be honest, it's a little bit of Irish blarney. However, they are doing things in a completely different way. What's very interesting about Web Summit, and I met the guys recently, is that they're not from an events background, and nor is anybody that they employ. The other interesting thing about Web Summit is when you talk to them about what they actually do, they see what they do as a technology platform. The most important thing for them is the quality of their technology. The event kind of just looks after itself. So there are newcomers coming into our arena. The other thing about events is it's incredibly easy to be subscale. So as I mentioned before, you know, you put on a small event, it's a lot of bloody work, there's not a lot of money in it, and there are lots and lots and lots of very small events. And the danger of being subscale, and this includes things like geo-cloning, where you've got a fantastic major mother brand, and you think, why don't we launch this in Singapore? Why don't we launch this in Sao Paulo? That's going to be a really good idea. And what happens is you end up with 7 different summits, all with roughly the same name, making absolutely bugger all money. So avoiding being subscale, I think, is very important. Disruption, as I mentioned, is coming, and I'll talk about that in a second. And when you're a very established big event, some of our events are 60 years old and plus, volume growth is really hard. With Spring Fair, for instance, even with Cannes Lions, it's actually quite hard to drive volume once you've established yourself as a platform. You then start cranking the yield handle, and you fall into the trap that actually people don't really care how much it's going to cost them because they're spending their company's money, right? So we can just crank that old yield handle. And eventually what happens is you start to lose the engagement of your customers. And that is a very big problem, I think, for large volume events. The other fascinating thing about events is the content. We seem to think it's okay that the content is provided by complete and utter amateurs. So how often do you consume content, for instance, on the BBC when you're watching Planet Earth 2? And if that content was created by people that actually never made a TV program before, you'd be slightly pissed off. We seem to think that when we run an event, we can get a load of people like me, who might be quite good at running businesses, to create all the content. And I'm not a professional presenter, nor is anybody that you're going to see today. And that is a problem, and the care and attention that event organizers put into content is nowhere near enough and nowhere near as challenging as it needs to be. I go to many, many events, and it's very clear that nobody in the organization has looked at the presentations, challenged the presentations, found out what the presenters like, helped them, trained them in any way whatsoever. And it's kind of insulting in a way, isn't it, that we put on an event and chuck on a load of amateurs to create the content for us. So that's an issue, I think, with events. And of course, the really biggest, nastiest problem is that anybody can do an event. And of course, media, especially magazines, newspapers, they've looked at their model. It's all going down the toilet. What's the easiest way to make a bit of money? We'll stick a conference or an awards on, and everybody is now trying to do an event. We had an example of this. We're going to launch a festival, a Money 2020 event in Singapore in 2018. And the bloody government of Singapore, bless them, having talked to us for months about launching in Singapore, decided they were going to launch their own FinTech festival in Singapore without telling us. So they had a 15,000 person festival in Singapore last month, and they've really scuppered our plans. And they're not professional event organizers, they're just the government of Singapore. So absolutely everybody can do it. And of course, everybody tries in just about every single category you can possibly find. This is in no way meant to be disparaging of the people that run Women in Logistics UK awards night, but it just shows you there's hardly a niche that you can find anywhere to uncover, because everybody can do it. Of course, the other thing that everybody can do is run an event, run an award show. Now, as the CEO of Cannes Lions for 10 years, I gave awards a great deal of thought. And I think there is a hierarchy that you can build for award shows. So at the very top is what you might call job production. That's the production of a job. There is one thing that's created, and this needs to be marketed as much as possible. So examples of that are films, TV shows, theatre shows, books, that kind of thing. And because that product desperately needs the saliency that an award gives it, it makes the value of that award very, very high. So examples are Oscars, Emmys, Tonys, Brits, Bookers, etc. If you then come down, there is another level of awards where if you win one of these awards, it is a primary way of winning business, and it proves my skill set. So Cannes Lions is a good example of that. If you are in the advertising industry, and you're a creative agency in the advertising industry, it's impossible to actually prove you're any good at what you do, because it is completely subjective. However, if you have an award proving that other people think you're good at what you do, there is value there, and a lot of value. And then you can come down to, for instance, architecture awards. So if you win the Sterling Prize, it's one way of proving your skill set, and it's one way of winning your business, but it's not the primary way, so it comes down a bit. And then you've got awards as a marketing tool. So the Decanter Wine of the Year, slapped on a bottle, hopefully it'll sell more wine, and it has a certain value. And then at the bottom, of course, are things like the Oil and Gas UK Awards. I'm sorry if you run it in this room, I don't know if you do, but it's just a nice to have. It's a staff thing where you're celebrating how great you are, but it's actually doing nothing for your business whatsoever. And this hierarchy of awards, I think, is played out when you see the scale of the awards, the price you can charge for them, how many entries you can get, etc. With Cannes, for instance, we get 43,000 entries. So I go to a lot of awards, and I think the way to approach awards is to try and get up that value chain as high as you possibly can. Now, obviously, there is already an Oscars for films, so launching an award for films might not be such a good idea. But the higher up you can get that value chain, the more value that you can drive out of the award show. You have to constantly reinvent categories. You have to come up with new ideas for categories, because volume growth is hard. And if you continually add categories, you'd be surprised how comfortable the market feels about that, because they're looking for different ways to try and show how good they are at what they do. And the growth of Cannes Lions over the last few years has been driven by new categories. Now, this is an interesting one, because I know there's a conversation later about sponsorship, but I would say that this does apply to not only awards, but actually events themselves. We certainly have absolutely no interest in acquiring or launching any event or any award that has sponsorship as the bedrock of its revenue stream. Sponsorship is extremely cyclical and difficult to control. So having sponsorship as the bedrock of an award show just makes life really, really hard. What you have to do, I believe, is have the entry fee as the bedrock of your award show. And if you can get to that position, then you aren't dependent on how many people are going to buy a table in the room, how many sponsors are we going to get, because there's a value to actually winning the award itself. And also, I would always avoid getting sponsors on stage. Nobody wants to see a bloody sponsor on stage. All it ever does is annoy people, and we never allow our sponsors on stage, keeping it as neutral as you possibly can, and being, if possible, a real arbiter of excellence within the industry that you're serving, the more neutral you can feel. There is a reason why the Oscars have PwC opening that envelope, and it's never been seen by anybody else until that envelope is opened. There is a reason for that, and that is because they have to be absolutely above any kind of risk of not being neutral. And then, of course, with any award show, a bit like presentations like this, keep it short. It's like the movies. Have you ever been to a film and thought, God, I wish that had been a bit longer? I don't think anybody's thought that. Mostly you think, I wish that film was 20 minutes too long. Award shows, fact, always too long. So keep it short. It's a bit like the movies. So, as Richard mentioned before, everything is being disrupted. And I just wanted to finish a little bit about just some random theories about how our industry will be disrupted. So on the one hand, I said before that the human desire and the need to be together and that serendipity and that tribal instinct will never, ever go away. So why will it be disrupted then? If you think about what we do, it's incredible. Actually, the business model has not changed, literally not changed, since whatever the 1980s, the 1990s. Maybe the payment systems have changed and some of our marketing has changed, but basically what we do on all of our models is we say, do you want to come somewhere to do business? We will find a big field or a big venue for you. Come on down, fill your boots, and pay us, please. Literally nothing has changed in terms of our business model. And I find it absolutely bizarre because every other industry on the planet has been completely disrupted. The Lad Bible is particularly interesting to me because I ran FHM, which was selling 1 million copies a month. It was the biggest selling magazine in Europe in the 1990s, and it got completely destroyed by the Lad Bible. And of course, we know what's happened to newspapers, and we know what's happened to magazines. So everything else is being disrupted, but aren't we lucky that events haven't been disrupted? I do think it's actually so far. But the good news is I don't think it is going to be a complete disintegration of the fundamental model. The fundamental model is incredibly strong. So where do I think that there might be some changes in the way that we should approach events? And this is just my vague theory. So the first is this idea of 365 engagement. So effectively, our business is actually, when you think about it, it's not that pleasant. If you look at it from a pure business point of view, because you have this massive spike of revenues. And that spike reflects the massive spike in engagement. So nobody, if you take something like Money 2020, nobody's thinking about it, and then they're thinking about it a real lot, and then they're not thinking about it anymore. And we've been living with that reality for a very long time. And I think the desire of our customers is to have much, much more continuous engagement. That's going to mean investment, because we're going to have to create content to engage our customers throughout the year. Now, I know this has been kind of like a holy grail for a long time. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. But I do think that the event businesses who do get their heads around this and start to build out membership schemes, content-led engagement schemes, 365 days a year relationships with their customers are going to be the winners. The fascinating thing about events, so if you think about your event and then you compare it to, say, a football match. Now, I don't particularly like football, but I think most of us can imagine a football match. There are kind of 3 different pockets of people that go to a football match. You've got the whole crowd, so everybody that goes to the match, right? So 52,000 people, Stamford Bridge, everybody there. And that's rather like all of our delegates rocking up. And then the second is what you might call groups of people. So they are people who know each other already. So it's a bunch of friends, it's a family, it's a father and his son, or a mother and her daughter. They know each other already, and they're going to the event, and they have a ready-made set that they can engage with. And then there's a third group, which I like to call communities. And a community is you're sort of standing in the queue for getting a beer or a hot dog or something, and you overhear that the guy in front's talking about how he coaches the little kids in his village at football. And you say, oh, that's funny, I do that as well. And you start having a conversation. And a few other people join, and you've created a community at the event itself. What's amazing about what we do, supposed professionals at what we do in events, is we create the crowd. We say, come on down. We've got a big old crowd. We hope you're coming with somebody you know already, because it's going to be a bit lonely if you don't. And by the way, when you're there, we really hope you meet somebody you like. Good luck. Next year, we'll let you know when you should pay us your money again. And that's quite amazing, isn't it? We make no real effort to help to build these communities. Now, you're probably thinking, as I would be if I'd heard that, I do make quite a lot of effort, if you must know. I publish the delegate list, and I try and put people together, and I've got this clever app that tries to do that sort of thing. But if you think about the sophistication of it, it is absolutely Stone Age, and we are the same as everybody else. Again, Web Summit are doing this brilliantly. They're talking about it brilliantly, but they're actually also delivering it really well. Because the creation of those communities, when you go to an event, why wouldn't you expect the people you're paying thousands of pounds to go to that event, why wouldn't you expect them to at least help you get the most out of that event? And we don't. And I think the events that do that are going to be the ones that really flourish in the future. And then the final disruption, I think, is obviously nothing new and a contentious one. But I do think it's strange that we sit there at B2B events and we think, oh, I don't know about making all of our content available, you know. I don't know about that. Even if I charge for it, I'm not really sure, because I don't know whether anyone's going to actually rock up to the event if I do that. And then you think about football and tennis and Glastonbury and every other damn event you can possibly name in the history of the universe. They have grown with their TV and internet delivery of what they do, and with the number of people who go to the event itself. It does not affect the people who want to go to the event themselves. The attempts that we've all made, and I'm sure you have, I know I have, to try and create a digital experience have been poor. But I think the coming together of the physical and the digital, we saw a bit of it in Richard's fantastic video, I love that video, that is coming down the road very, very fast. And I think we will all expect there to be a really rich digital experience that we could have if we can't make it to the event. And the good news about that is I think the revenue streams you're talking about could be absolutely massive. Now, I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about VR. You might have seen VR at my festival in that film a bit earlier on. I saw some VR experiences, and I've spoken to some VR experts about the future of VR. I honestly think it's a thing. I don't think it's a fad. I think it's a thing. And the thought that one day you could say to people, listen, if you can't make the event, that's fine. I'm going to provide you with a really immersive experience, I think is incredibly exciting. So our event business is very, very strong. It's a fantastic business, wonderfully embedded in human desire and human need, and has a really bright future. There are those challenges that I mentioned, but I think the biggest challenge of all, as Richard said when he presented, is what's the theory? They're just my theories. I could be completely wrong, almost certainly am. But they're my theories about what disruption might happen. And not that it'll destroy the business model, but that other people will do it better and they'll do it faster. And I would recommend that you have a really, really good look at what the Web Summit are doing, because they're a bunch of technologists who are disrupting our industry. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. So we've got a few questions on Slido, so if you want to stay up there, we'll be fielding them. So let's take the top question, shall we? So it seemed like you were a bit annoyed about the Singapore government.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you get pipped to the post, as happened in Singapore?
So with Singapore, we're going to do two things. The first is we're going to talk to the Singapore government about what more support that they can give us. Because the thing is, they want external event organisers to come in. They don't want they want, just like every city in the entire universe wants your event. We get hassled all the time by cities wanting our events. So they want the event, and so we're going to go back to them and say, what else are you going to do for us then? The second thing is we're seriously thinking about, don't tell Singapore this, whatever you do. We're seriously thinking about moving it to China. So that is what we can do, but it's very hard to know what to do. What we're doing in terms of building 365 engagement, we have a content-led strategy on it. So what we think is that because we have so much content in the events that we run. Cannes Lions, for instance, has 550 speakers with hours and hours and hours of content, with lots of winners of the Lions and lots of data that we can pull out of that. And we've been, flip-flopping around and doing it as a kind of like a bunch of amateurs. We've been trying to do that recently, but we're going to build out a capability to have content leading that 365 engagement. So you can package up the content and you can say, well, here is a whole load of content about VR, or here is a whole load of content about ad blocking, or in Money 2020's case, a whole load of content about the disruption in the lending industry or whatever.
What's your starting point as well? Just to ask that.
In terms of
in terms of the 360 engagement, where do you sort of, in terms of the strategy, where do you think you start it?
Well, I think we do a reasonable job at the moment, but if you think about, because I don't think we act like we don't see we see the customers like, we really hope we get a lot on the day. That would be brilliant, and I just think we're missing a trick in terms of the sheer volume of content that we've got. So we're quite a long way behind, but we're gonna. So how do you ensure new revenue streams from new awards categories and keep the ceremony short? There is an optimum of categories in your opinion. Very, very good question. We struggle with this at award shows all the time. And the fact is there are ways that you can always cut everything, everything. So that anybody here from a media background will know that if something's 400 words, you can make it 200 words and it will probably be better. In fact, we had this in Rome. So we ran an event last week in Rome, a festival in Rome. We had exactly this problem in terms of how you cut it short. So you don't get everybody up on stage, for instance. You just name check some people. You do not get everybody up on stage. You definitely don't have speeches. You try and keep the citations as short as possible. You get a really professional presenter who keeps it going and keeps it going and keeps it going. So there are ways. Or you eventually do what we did at Cannes Lions, which is you have more than one award show. So we have 6 award shows throughout the week of Cannes Lions. Because you can't get it all in one week. So therefore you've got an opportunity to grow it in that way. But it's a great, great question. It's a constant struggle to do that.
Let's just take maybe a question, the third one down. So you mentioned about awards not be built on sponsorship revenue. So what's your opinion on sponsorship revenue?
Well, like I mentioned before, if we get approached to buy a business that is largely dependent on the sponsorship revenue, I always say to the M&A guys, if you want to have a look, you can, but I'm just not interested. So I think, obviously everybody needs sponsorship. It's a fantastic icing on the cake, and it's a really important revenue stream. It is for Cannes as well. Don't get me wrong. With Cannes and Money 2020, sponsorship is a big, big revenue stream, but it's by no means the most important. And I do think that they're very, very flaky and built on sand if you have an event that is based on sponsorship. Because if it's based on sponsorship, that means the real value of the event, which is people paying to come, people paying to enter an award, or whatever it might be, that isn't there. So it's almost like you're selling something that's not real to a bunch of sponsors who one day are going to work that out, which is why I don't think that sponsorship is a good is good.
Let's say, Freddie, can be the last question actually because we have time, but how would you compare the importance of education and networking at the events? And would you say that there's a balance there of which one's more important?
I think it's another brilliant question. I mean, you know, the obvious answer is to say both, but actually I think networking is more important. And the reason I say networking is more important is if we're really honest with ourselves and when we do the research, it doesn't matter how great our event is. If you really read your research, very, very few people say, bloody hell, I sat in that plenary room, I was blown away, you know. It was like listening to Malcolm Gladwell crossed with Bill Clinton the entire time. You know, people don't say that because most people are just, you know, not many people have got that much brilliant to say is a simple reality. You know, we have Gwyneth Paltrow and Will Smith and Ban Ki-moon and all these amazing speakers, but even they sometimes get really bad, yeah, they get bad results in the research. So because of that, I do think networking, if you're going to concentrate on anything, that would be the one.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could put your hands together, please, for Phil Thomas.
Thank you.